So apparently, behaving in class, or rather, encouraging kids to behave in class, but I guess also behaving in class, is white supremacy. Yeah, apparently that is the case, according to this teacher activist. Now, why am I bringing this up? Not just to react to this, because as much fun as that is going to be, there's more to this. I am showing you this guy, just like I showed you the Utah teacher, just like I showed you the preschool teacher, because I'm trying to get the point across that our schools have a problem with activist teachers. Does that mean that all teachers are activists? No, of course not. You've met Frank McCormick. He's been on this channel, Chalkboard Heresy. Obviously, he's not an activist. You have met Mrs. G, who was one of the teachers who talked with us in the panel about subject matter expertise. Obviously not an activist, nor were any of the other teachers present in that group. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, that you have more than half who are, or who are at least in agreement with the premises acted upon by the activist teachers. So they are not actually doing anything to oppose them. It would be like if we went back to the Jim Crow period and we were to wonder how many hardcore white supremacists there were teaching in a school and how many just weren't going to say anything because they didn't want to get in trouble. But they didn't really agree, but or they kind of agreed, but they just weren't going to stick their necks out either way, either to do what the overt racists were doing or to challenge them. They were just going to go along to get along. Apply this with any time period in history where there was some kind of activism that we would call racist. I would call it racist today. And I think you're going to find that a loud, obnoxious minority can be very powerful. And I don't think it is a minority anymore. I'd say it's probably at least 50%, if not more. Why do I say that? I say that because of how teachers are educated and where this pedagogy comes from. I talked about this today on Twitter, got into it a little bit about school boards and how they're not really the best place to go if you're trying to change the pedagogy in the classroom. It's just not the right place. If you want to know my whole explanation for that today, because that's not what this video is about, you can go out to my Twitter account at InsomniaChick and you can read it for yourself. But I was trying to explain to people in that thread that you're still going to have a problem ultimately with the teachers because the pedagogy comes from a combination of things. It comes from think tanks, NGOs, and universities, academia. That's where it gets, thought up, written down, packaged, and ultimately, promoted, marketed, sold. How does it get sold? Well, it gets sold to states, usually through their university education programs. So first thing they do is it becomes the latest, greatest thing. They teach it to the teachers in the grad ed departments, and then it filters down into the education, general education degrees. And this becomes how teachers are taught. This is the latest thing. They have their own people, you realize, to write journal articles that are of questionable scholarship in terms of how rigorous the research is. They're even less rigorous than today's psychological research. But that becomes the pedagogy the teachers are taught before you've ever heard of it, before you've had a chance to challenge it. The teachers are taught this is the way kids learn, this is the way kids think, this is what you have to do as a teacher. There is a small rate of attrition there. There will be some students in teacher programs, education programs who say, wait, what? Like, this doesn't make sense. I don't like this, or this isn't what I thought teaching was going to be. And you might lose some people. But increasingly, you find that the people going into teaching are sort of self-selecting to be amenable to these types of messages. So they learn it, they learn the pedagogy, and they think they're doing the right thing. Then, because of that, and because the politics behind most of this pedagogy is aligned with what the union wants, the union supports it and will actually reward its teachers or encourage its teachers to get, training after they're in service in these pedagogies. So even if you've been teaching 10 years, 20 years, et cetera, you're going to go back and get some training in this. They also make sure, these promoters of the pedagogy, that members of school boards get access to it, so that at a minimum, even though they don't have a final say in curriculum, they are disinclined to oppose it because they've been told by the experts, because remember, school board members are not necessarily experts in this. They've been told by the experts, this is the way, this is how you do it. Okay. So when parents come screaming at them, it's easier for them to believe the narrative that parents don't know what they're talking about. This is the latest, greatest thing. Okay. So they train the school board members. They also then go to the bureaucrats at the top of the state boards of education. They sell it there. They tell them this is the latest, greatest thing. And so they put it into the standards. In some states, they mandate it. That's what this is about. This video is going to be about how increasingly critical social justice or critical theory pedagogy is becoming the preferred or mandated way to teach in our schools. So you see what's happened. We've evolved from, what are you talking about? That's some like legal theory they talk about in law schools. You're crazy. We don't do that in K-12. We went from there to, you don't actually know what it is, and you wouldn't recognize it if you saw it. So they stopped denying that it's only in the university and started saying, you don't really know what it is. You can't explain it. Then it came down to, well, not everyone's doing it. And, well, that's not what that is. I see there's this thing in K-12, but that's not what it is. And now we've arrived at, yes, it is essential. And we're putting it everywhere. And anybody who opposes us is a bigot. And so that brings us to today. I'm showing you the teacher, the activist teacher, so you can get yet another example of how the teacher in the classroom thinks about this. A thoroughly indoctrinated teacher, and this guy is one of many, I promise you. Remember Mullet Guy from another video? Yeah, go watch him. He's just mullet version of Rainbow Flag Guy. So then you go to, we'll take you to the Education Week article and read some of what's being said about critical race theory there, and also just critical pedagogy. And you'll understand why this is endemic at this point. It is the way, the truth, and the light in the church of the woke. It is not something you can just go yell at any, school board and say, get rid of it. It would be like yelling at the Catholic Church and saying, get rid of communion or something. It's just unlikely to happen. Okay. And they don't even have the power. But even if you went to the state board, who's all in on this stuff and half the time doesn't know about things like this guy, or is ready, willing, and able to believe, he's just one person, there's so much money, there's so much politics behind this that it's everywhere. So first, let's take a look at Rainbow Flag Guy. Listen closely.
I made a comment on one of Miss April's recent videos about PBIS, in which I stated that PBIS is white supremacy with the hug, and a lot of y'all wanted to know more about that, so here we go. First of all, thank you to Jack Copa, who reminded me that Dina Simmons was the first to coin this term, so thank you, Jack, so much. So if PBIS concerns itself with positive behaviors, we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what are those positive behaviors? And it's things like making sure that you're following directions and making sure that you're sitting quietly and you are in your seat, and all these things that come from white culture. The idea of just sitting quiet and being told stuff and taking things in a passive stance is not a thing that's in with many cultures. So if we're positively enforcing these behaviors, we are by extension positively enforcing elements of white culture, which therefore keeps whiteness at the center, which is the definition of white supremacy.
Okay. So where to go with that? Alrighty. Well, you heard it. Encouraging students to behave as white supremacy. Other cultures don't sit still on chairs. Did you know that? I guess if a black person is sitting on a chair in an office, they might accidentally fall off at some point when they remember they're black. I read that on Twitter. That wasn't mine. But it's so ridiculous. And yet he obviously believes it passionately. So much so, he took to TikTok to talk about it. That's white supremacy with a hug, said the white man. Apparently, he has more to say, though. He has more to say. Ready?
This is an idea that I think a lot of people have, and I want to call that in lovingly just for a moment. Yes, America contains many cultures and many races. That is not wrong. However, the problem comes when we don't think about this idea or this argument in a racialized way when it comes to power and power dynamics. In America, as in many other parts of the Western world, whiteness is the dominant racial ideology.
Whiteness is a dominant racial ideology. Notice he doesn't give us any kind of operational definition of whiteness nor racial ideology. But, I mean, not yet. Let's see in the last few seconds if he's going to.
So when we think of power in terms of race, whiteness has the most power.
What if we don't think of power in terms of race? What if we're not racists? What if that thought never crosses our minds? And as far as whiteness has the most power, he needs to define power.
So while there are people of many different races and cultures living in America, the fact that whiteness is the dominant racialized power structure.
Again, with the first it was a racial ideology, and now it's a dominant racial power structure. Which is it? Is whiteness an ideology or is it a power structure? Those are actually two fundamentally different things. I don't think he realizes that. And he's a high school English teacher.
That is the problem, and that is why we have to involve race in all of our arguments to consider.
We have to involve race in all of our arguments. That is why. That's the problem. You have not defined the problem because you've not defined your terms, like at all, sir. He teaches children.
This is an idea.
So that's his idea. This great idea, this high school English teacher. That was a whole lot of words to say a whole lot of nothing. But, you know, he's a teacher. So, yes, he is an activist. And he says, the only thing I want to teach is an anti-bias, anti-racist, social justice oriented educator. Some good news for today. 3 proposals accepted. And I can't wait to teach and learn together with so many awesome edus. And he's listing all these people. Okay, well, I can't wait to hear this one. What is this one?
I want to remind educators that instances of police brutality and the murders of black and brown people by police officers is directly connected to the work that we do. Because if any of those people had been white, chances are they wouldn't have been murdered. Chances are they wouldn't have been brutalized. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at all the instances of white people, especially white men, who oftentimes are brandishing weapons and who are taken into custody alive. So much of this is wrapped.
Wow. And what about unarmed Tony Timpa, who was choked out and nobody ever heard of him? What about the poor guy who was just showing off his rodent targeting gun or whatever in a hotel, and somebody called and he was shot dead unarmed in a hotel hallway in Arizona? Even I don't remember the poor guy's name because that's how little publicity it got. It certainly wasn't national news and there were no riots. This guy is talking out his you-know-where, and the statistics don't bear out anything he's saying, and he goes into classrooms and he teaches this garbage to people. Like I said at the outset, we have activist teachers. I don't know what you're going to remove from the curriculum itself that's going to get these horrendous ideas out of this man's head. And he's not alone.
Up an implicit bias, and we have incredible power to change people's biases when they are young.
That's called indoctrination. And actually, no, you don't, because first of all, you're assuming what their biases are, and you are being really, really presumptuous about what you're changing and what you're changing it to. You have a sense of power that you probably don't have. You don't know what conversations, as we just learned from Eric Smith, these kids are having with themselves in their own minds. So you don't know if they're just agreeing with you to shut you up and agree with you, and they're going to actually solidify their biases about all kinds of people, yourself included, as soon as they walk out of the classroom. You don't know. But what you're broadcasting that you want to do is indoctrinate children who may or may not even have these biases. You just know that they're white. There's a word for that. Racism.
Have to be talking about these issues in schools because every bit of it impacts our work. Ways in
our work. Who is our and what is the work? We have to be talking about it in schools because every bit of it impacts our work. He's talking about his activism. He's not talking about his teaching.
Which we teach, the ways in which we interact with students, the practices and policies we have, the ways in which they're implemented. There's so much. And many of us are talking about this, and many of us are making these changes, but not enough of us are.
Too many of you are. Way too many. So he believes it's not enough. And lest that give you hope, remember that he's on TikTok making these kind of videos openly about wanting to indoctrinate your children into completely racist ideas. White supremacist ideas, actually, to say that, black and brown people can't sit on a chair and pay attention in class. And so that you have to let the class, I guess, not do those things in order to what? So because everybody learns in a chaotic environment? No, nobody learns in that environment. Least of all, these kids who are already, because they won't shut up about it, on the downside of an achievement gap. So, yeah, he's an activist. Now, where does this come from and why? And, he says there aren't enough. Well, they're working on it. Here we have Education Week. This is September 9th. Teachers Union education groups unite to resist critical race theory bans. So, lest you were hopeful that it was unite to resist critical race theory. No, they're saying no to a ban on critical race theory. And so they talk about, some of the country's most prominent education organizations are pushing back against efforts to restrict teaching students about racism and oppression. Is that audience who follows me? Is that what CRT is? Teaching students about racism and oppression? No, it's teaching students in a mindset where you're constantly looking for racism and oppression. It is teaching in critical pedagogy, in critical theory. It is not teaching kids about a damn thing. Okay? If anything, you're just teaching them that, the about is all America is racist and all white people are racist. That's as far as about gets you. Amidst a flurry of state actions to ban discussions of divisive concepts and months of charged debates at school board meetings over critical race theory, a new coalition formed this week to help educators respond to community critique of curricula or anti-racism initiatives. The Learn from History Coalition, we're going to look at that and you will be horrified. Put together by the Stand for Children Leadership Center. Don't you love how they name these things in ways that make them sound really good? Learn from History and Children Leadership Center, Stand for Children Leadership Center. A nonprofit advocacy group plans to publicize first-person accounts of the harm and costs of efforts to restrict what is taught in classrooms across the country. Interesting. So remember at the outset I said that these groups, these activist groups, they're NGOs or think tanks, all of these groups have a lot of money and they have their own PR departments and they put together these things and they do all these articles. And what are they responding to? They're responding to community critique of curricula. Where are they seeing that community critique? At school board meetings. I said on Twitter today, here's the risk you run. I'm not saying don't go to the school board and scream and yell about critical race theory. I'm just saying you are handing these people all the ammunition they need to turn what you have said into the weapon with which to beat you. That is my point. So going about it a little more backdoor and a little bit lower and a little bit higher is probably going to be your better bet than having all this public video footage and commentary they could take out of context. And they're experts at that. When are people going to learn? Propaganda is their thing. They've been doing it well for a lot longer, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't need this YouTube channel, and I could be doing something else with my time, etc. So that's what they're doing. For students to create a better society. Did you know that's what students were supposed to do when you sent your kid off to kindergarten? Schools need to provide a thorough, accurate, and fact-based history education and teach students to reject racism and respect the equal value of every person, the site reads. Well, by all means, teach them the equal value of every person. Not the literal equality of every person. Not every person is literally equal or should be. We're equal under the law. We have equal value under the law, or in terms of, your life is as valuable as mine. All lives matter. Yeah, that's what I read there. It's not what they mean, but no, students are not supposed to create a better society, certainly not while they're students. And it's not even the job of them as adults. You make a better society by just growing up and being a good person as an individual, not by growing up to be an activist. But of course, we'll get to that. That's what they really want. No, it isn't racist to teach anti-racism. And then this is an opinion. Unfortunately, rampant misinformation about what is taught in schools is forcing teachers to omit difficult parts of our history and not teach students that racism is wrong, and adding yet another stressor for teachers at the worst possible time. This is a lie. This entire sentence is a lie. That is not being forced by anyone, anywhere. That is a straw man. The bans do not do that at all. Unless what you're saying is, in order to teach parts of our history or to teach that racism is wrong, you need to teach that racism is perfectly okay as long as the person on the receiving end of it isn't brown. The group identifies as bipartisan and names a wide range of partners, including AASA, the School Superintendents Association. Did you know the school superintendents had their own association? Yeah. So you probably thought they're not in a union, so they don't have the same amount of protection. Guess what? You were wrong. The American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, that's Randy Weingarten. The American Historical Association, the Education Trust, the National Council for Social Studies, the National School Boards Association. Again, the school boards themselves are indoctrinated with this junk, or at least silenced, chastened, etc. And Teach for America, which is directly receiving your tax dollars. Its website provides separate toolkits for school board members, school blah, 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 blah. Okay, so they have more than 2,500 people attended their virtual launch on September 8th. The opposition's narrative has been unanswered for much too long. Really? They've been answering it with lies for months. You don't know what you're talking about. We don't do that. That's not in the classroom. What? Chris Rufo's a Nazi. Blah, 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 blah. On and on and on. Yeah, they've been answering. They just haven't successfully persuaded all of us or shut us up and, it's made us believe that they're right and we're wrong. Over the past school years, more schools took up diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives after the murder, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it was after George Floyd was like where they said, time to go. If I didn't know better, and I do know better, don't worry, I would almost believe the conspiracy theorists who think that that event was practically staged to elicit this response. That's how coordinated and instantaneous it was. It was almost like someone flipped a switch. They didn't. I think they were ready to go with the stuff and just kind of like waiting for the right moment. And there, lo and behold, it was. And you know how that works in, situational design. They just wait for the crisis to hit and they're ready to go with their crisis kit. This was the crisis kit. Opponents of these programs and lessons claim that schools were using them to teach critical race theory, because they are. An approach to legal studies which holds that racism is systemic and that even laws and policies that are race neutral in the face can have racist outcomes. They not only are teaching in critical pedagogy, they are teaching this exact thing at this point. They now are teaching this exact thing. If they're teaching 1619, that's what they're doing. In public discourse, critics of DEI initiatives have misinterpreted and misappropriated the term, using it to refer to a host of educational priorities. Are you ready for this? From history lessons on the civil rights movement, diverse classroom libraries, to culturally responsive teaching. Okay, diverse classroom libraries and culturally responsive teaching. Let's talk about it for a moment. I'm getting reports from people that librarians, and then all you have to do is convince one person in a whole district sometimes, or one person in a school, they are putting crazy books into libraries. They are putting books in that are basically pornography, okay, whether it's about gender theory or critical race theory or any of this. They're filling the libraries up and putting them on reading lists and sharing them with students in their resource center time or with teachers to suggest they put them on lists. So the library is not just a diverse library. The library is actively pushing these ideas, and then cultural responsive teaching straight up, and we're going to hear about that more from some people next week, is like SEL, it's just another name for seeing everything through a racial essentialist lens. And it's telling students, like, you can't get meaning out of the content unless you see yourself in it. How exactly is that fundamentally different from critical race theory? And anything that doesn't have you in it is systemically racist or the product of whiteness or any of that. It's just the same beast, different clothing. Okay? As of this month, 27 states have introduced bills or taken other steps that would restrict teaching critical race theory in K-12 schools or limit how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. Yes, I know, it's terrible. They can't separate the kids by race. They can't demand that they profess their guilt. They can't, inquire as to their private business. They can't do a lot of things that we would not want them to do anyway, that are even currently illegal in every single state, because that is not how you teach kids an accurate history or teach them to be compassionate towards other people. That is what they're trying to do. They're trying to just go reaffirm the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Oh, how terrible. In these states and others, some parents and community members have also accused teachers of promoting critical race theory, singling out lessons and materials at heated school board meetings. See, I told you they're going to go back and use the school board meetings, these heated school board meetings, right? Some newly formed national groups like Parents Defending Education have provided talking points and step-by-step guides to help parents challenge anti-racism efforts, instructing them on how to write op-eds, what to ask school board members, and how to talk to the media. Oh, how terrible. And this group purports to do the same for the other side. I'll show you in just a moment what they're putting together to help them fight back against these poor parents that are, like, hey, I don't spend every day public speaking in front of a school board or any other body of people I don't know. And I'm not really sure what the best way to go about this. And I want to be effective. Can you help me? Yeah. Oh, what a terrible thing that they're doing. They make it sound so sinister and conspiratorial. The Learn from History Coalition also offers guidance on messaging and listening resources. So see, they even admit it. They also offer guidance. And it's new messaging. So it's a thing. All right. Guides for school boards and school system leaders suggest releasing statements to the community declaring that their schools don't teach critical race theory, but that they do teach a thorough, accurate, and fact-based history education. No, they don't. No, they don't. Because if they did, they would not be teaching 1619. It's not accurate. It's not fact-based. It's opinion. Straight up. If they did, they would not be teaching that America is systemically racist and a white supremacist nation to this day, or really ever. If they did, they would explain that slavery was not prevalent all over the entire country until the Civil War. They would explain the real roots of the Civil War. They would explain Abraham Lincoln accurately and not fixate on that he wasn't, completely anti-racist. They don't do that. So they're lying. And they're teaching critical race theory. But let's go back. I promised that we would check out the Learn from History materials. Here we have it. Learn from history. Okay, see now I have a jaundiced eye, so I can look at these things maybe a little differently than you. We have the sit-ins. By the way, right here in North Carolina, there's a gentleman who participated in the World Wars sit-in who has been canceled because he gave a convocation at a Trump rally. He is a literal civil rights leader and fighter, and he's been canceled because he had wrong think, I guess. And he, I believe, is opposed to critical race theory. I am not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. So Jackson, Mississippi, Charlottesville, Virginia. Again, this picture has been used so many times to convey a message of, these are white supremacists, these are neo-Nazis. Some of them may be, but this entire gathering was put together by people who did not want the statue taken down at University of Virginia, and they were guarding the statue, and they went to protest the people who want to take down the statue. I don't like how they went about it. I think tiki torches is a really, really bad way to go about it if you're not trying to come across as white supremacists. And for the record, there were some white supremacists there, so I'm not denying that. But to juxtapose these two things is a bit much. This was a movement for civil rights to advance something forward. And this is a bunch of yahoos getting together with torches to protest the taking down of a statue. Juxtaposing them is not, these are not the same people who persecuted them. They're just not. History will keep repeating unless we learn for it. So they want you to believe that these people want to put black people back in chains, that they were carrying tiki torches because they want this to happen again. That's what the image is saying. And that's why saying history repeats itself. I'm just telling you what it means. A broad bipartisan majority of Americans agree for students to create a better society. And again, a broad coalition of people do not agree that's the job of students. Need to provide a thorough, accurate, and fact-based history. Notice how they're repeating it. It was first in Ed Week, and now they're just repeating this group. So this is, we all deserve an honest education about race and history in this country. All of our kids do. Who would argue otherwise? Again, straw man argument implicit in that. They are claiming that people who oppose critical race theory don't want this. We do. Critical race theory is not accurate. That's our contention. But we don't ever get to make that argument because it's presumed to be accurate. Oh, but no, I'm sorry. They're not teaching critical race theory. Their version of history is presumed to be more accurate than anybody else's. Truthful history is essential. And then here we get down to the meat of it. Typically, your average suburban middle-class kid sees themselves in textbooks and on TV, whereas kids of color are not seeing themselves. Learn the truth equals avoid repeating the mistakes. So what they're doing is they're taking when I turn on TV, I see mostly white people, kind of like when I walk around the streets because white people are the majority population. Sorry, still the case for a little while longer. But that doesn't in and of itself preclude someone learning the truth about history. Juxtaposing those two things and claiming that you have to see yourself in the history to learn a true history is actually false. In fact, if you fixate on people who look like you're going to miss 90% of history, because most of the people who made up the history of the United States don't look like them. So which truth are we teaching here? Obviously not the truth, maybe just a specific subset of truth. Misinformation fuels dangerous censorship. It is not censorship in a public school to tell teachers they may not segregate their students. It is not censorship in a public school to tell teachers they may not teach the kids that America is a terrible place. That's not censorship. Teachers do not have complete unlimited freedom of speech inside a school. If they did, they'd be teaching the Bible, some of them. Some of them might be teaching Satanism. Some of them might be teaching Buddhism. Who the heck knows what they'd be teaching? But to say that they have this absolute freedom of speech inside their classroom is a lie. Meanwhile, students do. Students do. But students are the ones being censored. If you try to raise your hand and challenge what the teacher's teaching you in this regard, you will be in trouble. It has happened. Talk to Gabrielle Clark. If our country is ever going to realize its potential of who we say we are and what we claim to be, we have to tell everyone's histories accurately and fully. Everyone. Yes. Can we tell the accurate history of the founders and the accurate history of people that you might not like because they own slaves? No, they don't want to do that. They want to teach the selected history that is the negative stuff about people they want you to think ill of, and only the positive history of people they like, even though they may have done some naughty things. And that would include Angela Davis, by the way. Educators and students need our support. Our kids only benefit when they learn how to have respectful, honest conversations with people who are different from them. It's a fundamental skill they will need in college and their future careers. Yeah, who would disagree? But that's not what's happening. If you support affinity groups and segregation in the classroom and in the school, are you really doing that? Are you encouraging discussions with people who are different? Are you really making it a place where people can hear other points of view and express other points of view safely? Or are you making it very clear what wrong think is and what right think is? We just heard from Mr. Whiteness is a political ideology. Whiteness is a racist ideology without defining what whiteness is. And at some point, whiteness is simply going to become a phenotype. Except if you disagree with the people who espouse these views, then it's sitting on a chair. Failing to teach accurate history deprives young people of the quality education they deserve. It disadvantages them and our nation in the long run. You know what else does? Not teaching them how to read. So let's look at some of these groups. Well, we saw the AFT, right? And where do we have? Okay, Teach for America, the National School Boards Association, the News Literacy Project, Organization of American Historians, American Historical Association, the Center for Anti-Racist Education. I think that might be Kendi's group. Democracy Prep, public schools. That's the one Gabrielle is suing. And then Educators for Excellence. And I realize I'm running long, but I want to show you. They have a guide for school board members, a toolkit for parents, a teacher toolkit, a guide for school system leaders, and then a whole learn more here. Let's take a look at the teacher toolkit for the activist teachers. Thank you for joining our effort to stand up for teachers and ensure that students can learn accurate, thorough, and fact-based history in our schools, etc. Ask other educators to join our coalition, participate in events in your community, share your story, write a letter to the editor, background. They keep saying this is a accurate history, but what do they put here? Believe racism is widespread and harmful to society, and that schools have a responsibility to teach students what racism is wrong. When did we do otherwise? When did we do otherwise? Want to reduce political division and rancor? Who doesn't? This is like implying that parents defending ed don't want to do that. Well, that's just a flagrant lie bordering on libel. Okay? And then it says a Texas bill seeks to remove requirements to teach about slavery, the Ku Klux Klan, Native Americans. That is a flagrant lie. This is a lie that will not die. That's not what they're saying. If you go back and look at what they were trying to do, and look, I can find fault with Texas law all day long, but that is literally out of context and a lie. And they say Louisiana, Ohio vaguely worded bills sought to censor teachers for discussing divisive concepts, which could include any aspect of U.S. history related to race. Could, but doesn't, because it was not vaguely worded. A copycat Tennessee law threatens schools that teach so-called divisive concepts with a loss of state funding. Reword the bill. Reword the bill if you don't like it. No one's trying to, there's literally no one saying don't teach about race, don't teach racism is wrong. If you don't like the bill, That's fine. Reword the bill. But the concepts in the bill are valid. We should not be teaching kids that the nation is a fundamentally racist place, because that is factually incorrect. That doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist, but there's a difference between racism exists and the nation itself is racist, whiteness itself is racist. These kinds of concepts are inherently critical theory. Pennsylvania bill would authorize any resident and financial blah, blah, blah. So let's see. These are, all the people who support this. Huge numbers of people. Key points to communicate. Questions you may have asked. Do you teach critical race theory? No, we provide students with a thorough, accurate. They're just lying. They're lying. Here's what they can do. This is all about activism, okay? So, like I said, they're criticizing people. They're criticizing people for putting together toolkits, and then they put together a toolkit. And it's quite, it's quite comprehensive. And then they have learn more here. No, that just takes you back to the homepage. But you see, this is propaganda. This and the Ed Week article, and that just shows you how, Ed Week is basically a propaganda magazine, because they put this forth, okay? And they have these opinion pieces, but you notice what is missing. There is nothing from the other side, and yet it's called Education Week. They're not interested in hearing from anybody else other than this point of view. This is what you're up against. This is what you're up against. That and, rainbow flag dude. Splaining. He's critical race splaining to you. Although he won't call it that now. They've gotten wise. They're not calling it that. Some of them are. But yeah, he's probably more typical. He says there aren't enough of him, but I would tell you there's probably about half who are at least not willing to go up against him. And the other half, where are they? Where are they? I'm being generous. I actually don't think they're half. I'm lying. I don't think it's half. I think they've all been educated the way I described. I think they're all loving this junk. They love it. They think they're part of something good. And they're not. They're part of something really bad. Borderline evil. It's going to destroy our country and tear it apart and destroy our kids. So I just wanted to bring that to you. Like I said, I go read what I said on Twitter about going to the school board. I'm not saying it's all the way wrong. Well, yeah, kind of am. It's a waste of your time. Colossal waste of your time. And people say, well, we're making people aware of what's happening. I can assure you there are better ways to make people aware. Much better ways to make people aware. Go door to door. Sloan said that the other night. You take the curriculum pieces and you go into your neighborhood and you knock on doors of your friends and your family and your community. Get to meet these people again. Build community. And when you're standing there on their doorstep and say, hi, are you aware of what's being taught at our school? Here, I want to show it to you. They might slam the door in your face. They might not. But standing there and yelling on TV gives these people all the ammunition they need to put together this slick, well-funded, beautiful propaganda piece that's full of lies. And you're not going to be able to defeat that. Why is the state board going to listen to you after that comes out? Why are the superintendents or the principals going to listen to you after that? They're more likely to listen to you if you persuade all of your neighbors en masse to show up at the school and demand to see the principal that has this stuff in the classroom. And when the principal realizes he's got an angry mob outside who don't want this junk in the classroom, and he goes to his boss, the superintendent, who now has an even bigger, angrier mob because it also now includes the principal and maybe some more people, they're going to have to do something. Or not. But at least then you'll know. But the school board can't help you. There's only 2 school boards in the entire country that have any say in curriculum, and that's Connecticut and Vermont. The rest simply do not. So, do it your way or do it my way. It's your choice. And that's if you want to stay in the schools. Obviously, I think you should get the heck out because I think it's a losing battle either way. But at least use your time wisely. Anyway, that's what I had to report. If you like this sort of content or find it valuable, please slam that like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video, comment on the video. I would also appreciate you joining my locals community, thereasonwelearn.locals.com. And that's the video.